how to knit in Magic Loop using 2 sets of circular needles. And you'll need 2 sets with the same size needle. So these are both US size 6. And you ideally want to be able to tell them apart, so maybe even different colors, but they do still need to be the same material. If you had metal on one and wood on the other pair, for example, you'd likely have some tensioning issues in your project. So these are both Likey needles, but I've got one set that's 3-inch and one set that's 5-inch. We're going to start by casting on. I'm just going to cast on a few, all onto the same needle. The only really tricky part about this is getting it set up in the first place, and then once it's set up, it really just rolls right along. This can be used for anytime you're knitting in the round. It can be used on big projects, like on a sweater. It can be used on hats. It can be used on a tiny project like the sample I'm going to show you today that maybe you would normally have done with double pointed needles or the more traditional Magic Loop. I'm going to do a couple more. All right, so those are now the stitches that I have cast on. The first thing I do is slide them to the other end. Here we are on the other end. This is my working yarn. And I'm going to slip about half of them onto my second needle, your second cable, not just the end of the cable you were already working. All right, that's about half. So now you can see this is my working yarn coming off over here, and this is the next stitch that needs to be knit so that they can be knit in the round, so that we're going to be traveling in the round. So I'm going to fold those over. So the stitches I'm working next are in front. Pull the cable that has those stitches that need to be worked. I'm going to pull that out next. That's the tail end. So here is where your working yarn needs to be. It needs to be kind of in the center of your circle, right? So not out over here, not down under this needle and up and over because you'll have issues. So it comes right up kind of in the middle. And those back stitches that you finish working, they can just rest in the middle of that cable needle. You're now going to take the other needle. So this, you'll see I have it's where the stitches that need to be worked is the short needle, so I'm using the other end of that cable. Again, this is the tricky part to get it set up right in the first place. So that needs to come, the working yarn needs to come up and over. There we go. And then the second end of my needle. So there I am all set up. These are the stitches to be worked. Those back here are the stitches I've already worked. My working yarn is coming in from the middle of the circle. So the first stitch you just knit to connect the circle. And maybe knit that one just a little bit tighter than usual to make sure there's a nice secure join. And then you continue around until you've used up all the stitches on the end of that needle. Okay, so here we are at the end. So I'm done with all the stitches on the left needle. I'm just going to let that needle go. We're actually completely done with these for a minute, so I'm going to let that fall. So it's just in the middle. I'm going to flip over my work. Now I have this. These are the stitches I'm going to work next. So I'm going to get them positioned onto the other cable needle. You'll see this is now the long needle, right? And I've got both ends of my long needles that are on that cable. And you just continue to knit just like that. So again, the biggest trick is to make sure you're always working with the 2 ends of the same cable. You never are knitting from one cable onto the other cable. We're at the end again. Okay, so those are the stitches I just worked. Pull into the middle, flip the project over. These are the stitches I need to work. Push the end. The needle in, pick up the same end, that's the one I'm working with right now, and you go again. Here we are with the piece that's a little bit more established, And it's very easy to see now how to switch the needles at the end of the row. So just wanted to show you that one time. I would note here that I'm working on the outside of the circle, right? That's important. When we get to the end, if it's a big project, you really just, it feels more like a circle, but here on something tiny, it feels almost like we're just flipping it over. It's exactly what we're going to do. We're just going to flip it here, pull out the needle we just finished. Whoops. And then get the next needle in the correct position, and you just go again. You can use this instead of double pointed needles, as I mentioned, and one reason that's handy is I don't ever seem to have any issues with laddering using this technique, whereas sometimes it's a challenge to work through with double pointed needles. I'll get here to the end of this row and then show you. So here is the space between the two rows. Like this is where the two needles come together, and you can see there's just not any gap at all there. It's just perfectly smooth and even. And I find that it always turns out that way, which is great. So that is everything you need to know about knitting in the round, even on a small project, with 2 sets of circular needles.